Hey, everybody, welcome to the Aligned Love Podcast. This is the place where I am going to help you find the one thing that you feel is missing: healthy love. I am your host, Lauren Zoller, and in this podcast, I will share with you how to attract love, live in alignment, and elevate your deepest relationships. So buckle up, get present, tune into your body, and open up to the possibility that you truly do get to have it all. Let's dive in. Today on the Aligned Love Podcast, we have Lilly Rachels. Lilly's professional journey began in the gym as a personal trainer and trauma-sensitive yoga instructor. It was during this time that she noticed how openly her clients shared intimate details of their lives, which sparked a calling in her to pursue a career in psychotherapy. After earning a master's in social work, she began to work as a therapist. With a desire to offer a more holistic experience, she transitioned into coaching. Lilly's coaching practice is centered around helping men build strong, intimate relationships, teaching effective communication and how to navigate conflict with composure. Integrating various transformative tools such as movement, breath, meditation, Enneagram, and human design, Lilly creates bespoke journeys for her clients. Lilly also happens to be my best friend, and I am so excited to have her on the show today. Lilly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
This is so overdue.
I know.
You guys, we have been talking about doing a podcast together for probably, I don't even know, like 2 years now. And we thought about, okay, we need to just start a podcast together. And then I decided to relaunch my podcast. And I feel like we're still going to do in the future a podcast together. But I'm excited that we get to just kind of like, pop our podcast cherry today, which is kind of disgusting, but that's what's happening on the show today.
It makes it feel more special.
For sure. Awesome. So I always like to start the show, and I'm going to do it no different with you, with an intention setting. And you come from the yoga world, so you know all about setting an intention. But really, this is just for us to just kind of set the tone for what it's going to be like in our conversation today. So I'm going to hand the mic over to you, and I want you to set the intention for this podcast talk today.
I want to set the intention that people leave with more curiosity and a deeper desire to not only know themselves, but if they're in a relationship, to explore who their partner is.
So big. Curiosity, one of my favorite words. I use that all the time in everything that I do in my practice. So tell us, before we dive into the depths of communication, because I know that you and I could geek out on this for hours. I want people to know a little bit about your background, because I know for me, it's super important about where you came from, because I know that your traditional background, you came from talk therapy, you have your master's, you are really the person that I process everything with, and from a cognitive standpoint. But I know that part of your journey was that you understood there was a missing piece too in the talk therapy journey. So can you just give people a little bit of a background of what prompted you to go into therapy, step away from traditional talk therapy, and make your way into what you're doing now?
Yeah, of course. So as you read in the bio, I started off as a personal trainer, and realizing how open people were about their lives and how much I enjoyed listening, I was like, I want to become a therapist. And then when we met, yoga teacher training, that was the first time I got a glimpse of this mind-body connection thing. So I was super curious about that, the trauma-sensitive yoga training. And that's really what pushed me towards kind of pursuing this pull into therapy. And I loved grad school. I thought it was great. And then I started working as a therapist, and the place I worked was a nonprofit. And in order to bill medical, you had to diagnose within the intake session. And it was because of, codes and everything. So insurance would pay, but it really bothered me because I was like, there's no way, like me after this, my master's program, can diagnose someone with 90 minutes of talking to them, when at least 20 of those minutes was just getting to know each other and building some rapport. So I found that really aggravating. And then one day I had a client come in, 17-year-old girl, and she just walked in, and I was clearly the 7th therapist she had seen in her high school career. And she just laid out all of her trauma. This is all the things you need to know about me. Here are the questions everyone's going to ask. And so I started going through like what medications you were on. And she was on an antidepressant. She was on an anti-anxiety medication. She was on a medication to help deal with the stomach distress she was experiencing from her medications. And in total, she was on about 5 different pharmaceuticals.
Ugh.
I know. And I remember sitting there and looking at her, and I was like, when's the last time you drank a cup of water? And she just kind of looked at me and was like, I don't know, maybe 3 days ago.
Mm.
And it was in that moment, I was like, I can't help you until like, first off, we get your body healthy. Like your brain isn't able to like process any of this. Again, at this point in my career, I hadn't even gone into like the body part of it, but it was just the health alone. And to know that like medical practitioners had seen this teenager, 17 years old, and put her on 5 different medications and never dealt with the root cause, which was clearly trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, I would say, was the start of this like disenchantment with being a therapist in the traditional world.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. Sean, who, you know, my boyfriend, showed me a video from Dana White this morning talking about how broken our medical system is. And he was speaking in relationship to medical doctors, saying, never again will I go to a traditional medical doctor unless I have a broken foot or there is some sort of illness that has hit me that I need immediate care for. There's just nothing about what our therapy world practices, for the most part, traditional talk therapy, what you go to school for and you get your master's in, and then maybe go on to get your PhD. None of it teaches how to get to the root cause and how to actually look at the body. It's so driven by a diagnosis. And what is this problem that you're having? It's symptom management. And I think that it's important. I don't know. I just wanted to highlight that because I know that we're going to go in a different direction. We're going to talk about communication today, but it's important to know that even traditional trained therapists are starting to recognize there's something different. Like there's something missing in the way that therapy is taught, in the way that traditional MDs are taught to diagnose. Mm-hmm. And so I know that the intention has been curiosity. That's what you said. And so I just wanted to plant that seed here on the podcast too, that you're hearing from a trained therapist saying that, hey, you know what? Something is broken in the way that we're taught to administer therapy.
Absolutely. And I actually had a friend, it was about 2 weeks ago, tell me that she had gone to see a therapist and she went in there saying like, I want tools to deal with like some anxiety. She's like, I want tools. And the therapist kept steering her towards medication. And she was like, I don't want medication. I want tools. And I was very aggravated when she told me this, but it's still like really rampant where people just want to put a Band-Aid on it. They want to give you a pill instead of, again, dealing with the root cause. So if you're out there and you have someone telling you just medication, and I'm not saying it's the horrible thing to do. There are cases where maybe that is the best step for you, but like always deal with the root cause first.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I even say that all the time too. There's medication can actually help even from a somatic sense. If I'm looking at the nervous system and we're looking at, regulating survival response patterns in the body, medication can help buffer that for a time being, but it's not a long-term solution. And I think even just to tie this into what we're about to talk about with communication, I personally believe it is so hard to truly find deep communication with yourself and with someone else when you're living underneath a diagnosis or you're on all of these medications that can't actually give you the space to truly know your body. So we're going to kind of segue into communication now because I want to talk about why it is so critical, because I truly believe that communication is the key to really successful anything, a successful career, a successful relationship to yourself, a successful relationship to your health. And most importantly, which is why we're here today, it is the key to healthy partnership and being able to date with ease. So let's just start with the basics. Can you share some insight with everyone? why effective communication is so crucial when it comes to navigating the dating world and being in partnership.
Absolutely. So number one, no one can read your mind. Like I can try to read your mind, but then I would just be making assumptions and creating a story about what you're thinking and what you're feeling. And when you go into a relationship or you go into dating, expecting someone to just know or just get it, you're already like putting yourself in a position where you're going to be disappointed and confused. And if you don't know how to verbalize like what you need and what you desire, you're not going to get it. Like it doesn't exist because you can't ask for it. And it really sets the relationship up for success when you're able to say, hey, like I'm looking for this. What are you looking for? Even when you start dating someone, if you're not good at communicating, you're unlikely to sit down and say, hey, I'm looking for a long-term relationship. What are you looking for?
Yeah. Yeah. So big. And it's important to even, I mean, just to like get personal here for a second, Lilly and I have never, we don't fight a lot. We've never really fought, even though arguing and communication is so like arguing is important, even in friendship, but we did have one big argument.
Oh, we did.
We did. We had a really big argument about a year and a half ago. And I think about my tendency is to run away from communication. Like I am so avoidant. I want to go hide in a hole and just run away and pretend that nobody is ever going to find me in that hole and that everything's going to be okay. And thank God for Lilly, because in that moment, and this is me being vulnerable and human, she moved towards me and said, no, we have to communicate about this. Like, this is something that we have to talk about. And of course, it brought us closer together. Truly, I think it brought us closer together as friends, which is what communication does. If you learn how to communicate properly, even ruptures in partnership or in friendships, they bring you closer together with someone. So that's a challenge that you and I experience, but I want to know too, how do you navigate this in your current relationship? Like, get vulnerable with us. I want to know how you and Ryan have navigated difficult conversations or arguments with effective communication, because it's so important. So kind of give us the inside scoop of that.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things I struggle with is I also want to withdraw when emotions get really heightened. I grew up in kind of an environment where my parents had really volatile arguments. And so my go-to when I was little was to go hide in my room, sit on the ground, wrap my arms around my knees because I felt safe and I wanted to remove myself. So I still fall into that desire to just withdraw and not say anything. But something I've been really working on in my own life is I have to say what I need to say. But the new pitfall I fall into, because I've gotten much better at, I'm going to come to you, I'm going to tell you how I feel, is to listen when someone else wants to share what they have to say and there's strong emotions behind it. So if you guys know anything about the Enneagram, my boyfriend is an Enneagram 8, as is Lauren's.
So is mine. Oh my gosh. We're going to segue really quick because Lilly sent me a text message a few days ago that said, I am starting a support group for people who date 8s.
So if you're out there,
stay tuned for that, because that might be coming if you are looking for a support group for dating an 8. Okay, continue.
Because 8s can be intense. They can be intense, I think is a good way to put it. They can have strong feelings and strong just how they feel about things, their thoughts, their opinions. They're not going to hold back. Whereas I'm probably going to sugarcoat it a little bit for you. So this is actually pretty recently, Ryan and I got into an argument where I shared how I felt, and then I kind of wanted things to go my way, right? And then he started to share, and I had to physically make myself stay where I was in my seat, not run away, go sit in my bedroom and wrap my arms around my knees and listen. And I think that's something that a lot of people will be like, well, I know how to communicate, but they don't know how to listen, and they don't know how to hold space for their partner's emotions. And after he was able to share, I was able to be like, this is what I heard you say. This is where I am with this. And we were able to talk through it then and work it out. But it took me like sitting in that uncomfortable and like noticing in my body that I want to run away right now, but I'm choosing to be here because this is, what I want more. And my partner sat here and listened to me complain and cry about the situation. So I have to sit here and hold space for his emotions. And maybe his don't look like tears and mine do if I get really upset. Maybe his are a little bit different, but I have to be willing to also honor what he needs.
Yeah, so big. That is such a tangible takeaway, because oftentimes when we think about communication, we don't think about listening. We think about, okay, what words can I use to be nonviolent? Or what words can I use so that the other person will understand me in a way that's, meaningful and in a way that's easy to understand. But what you're saying is that really the key to effective communication, one of the keys, because there's several, and we're going to talk about those in a minute, is learning to listen. And I think even as you say that, there's a difference between active listening and passive listening, right? And that's where my brain goes. Passive listening is I'm listening, but I'm thinking about what I'm going to say to you next. So you're not really, yeah. So you're not really actually listening to what they're saying. And then there's the active listening piece, which is, okay, I'm actually absorbing what you're taking in and I'm noticing how it's landing in my body. And I'm choosing to recognize that from a somatic sense, but I may not be reacting from that space. So I know about listening. What else? Like, what else should people prioritize? Let's talk about just being in a relationship right now, because I want to go into the dating realm here in a minute too, because it's a little different. What else should people prioritize when it comes to communication skills, like fundamental communication skills when in a partnership?
So something I think is really important, and there are skills like, use I statements instead of you statements. But where I really think people should start is to understand why you communicate the way you do. Because again, like what I shared when I was little, I witnessed my parents communicate in conflict a certain way. So I developed this fear of conflict. So I became more withdrawn and avoidant of conflict. And so doing the work and understanding, like, why am I the way I am? What was conflict like when I was a child? Like, how did I respond when I saw people in conflict? And then also digging into, how did I get my needs met as a child? What did I do? Did I yell and scream and then I got attention? Or did I never express my needs and just try to kind of meet them on my own? And once you kind of dig into that, it's how is that still showing up in my relationship? Because chances are that pattern you developed as a child, if you haven't explored it, it's probably repeating in your romantic relationship, and you are showing up as that adaptive child version of you when things get tense with your partner.
Yeah. So step one is to understand, like, where did your communication style come from? And how did you react when your needs weren't getting met? I think that is brilliant. And that's, again, when we talk about root cause, coming back full circle, that's how you understand really anything in your life, is to look at how is it conditioned in your body? How did your nervous system learn to react or protect when it comes to communication? So understanding that, then once someone understands, okay, this is how I react when my needs aren't being met, and this is also how I react when in communication, then what do they do to start to establish speaking or communicating what it is that they need and setting boundaries?
Yeah, so something super easy to use is what's called the feedback loop. And this is where if a situation happens and you and I are in conflict, like we had a year and a half ago, is to first find clarity. Number one, find clarity. Get really clear on what the problem actually is. Because it's easy when we let something kind of build up in our head, we ruminate on it, we create a story around it to make this problem so much bigger than it is. So it's ripping things down to the facts. What actually happened? Like maybe you and your partner were out and he got a text message from someone, you saw another girl's name, and that's what actually happened. So you would share with him, hey, when we were out the other night, I noticed that you got a text message from Michelle. And then the second step is to share that feeling. How did you feel? How did you feel in your body when that happened? Well, maybe you felt really jealous, or maybe you dig a little deeper and you felt insecure and scared because it threatened the stability of your relationship. And then after you share the feeling, that's when you get to share the mess, the story I made up in my head. And it's important to say it that way. The story I made up in my head, because you're taking ownership of your feelings. You're taking ownership of the story that you attach to things. And then you can share the mess. Maybe I saw that text message and I thought, maybe you're not into me, you're into her, or you're cheating on me and I'm really scared. And then you share what you need to move forward. And this is the hard part where a lot of people struggle, because sometimes it takes time to really think about, like, what do I need to move forward? Am I looking for an apology? Am I looking for, you just to kind of console me and tell me it's okay? Or is this rupture so big, I don't even know if I can continue the relationship?
Yeah, so big. If you are taking notes right now, you need to just pause and rewind that and just write all of it down because it's so vital. It's so vital that you understand that. Truly, I think, is the basics of nonviolent communication. How do you sit down? I remember when you and I had that disagreement a year ago, the part that you speak about by saying the story that I created is, it's so wild how when we both brought our stories to the table, we were both able to look at each other and say, that story is so false. Like, that is not, and it's wild how many times, especially in relationships, and I see this in dating situations and then in relationships with partners that come into my practice, how many people allow arguments and miscommunication to wreck a relationship because of the stories that they have created. It's wild.
Oh, and it's so sad. And our stories were so completely different. Like, they were so different. And when I work with clients, I talk a lot about, like, assumptions and misunderstandings. Like, those are the two things that are going to kill your communication. Because when you start to assume, and I think we both did this in our situation, like, we assumed we knew what the other person was thinking and feeling. And so we didn't ask. Instead, we got more and more upset over our experience without being curious about their experience. And then that's where the misunderstanding set in. And so many people they'll argue about something, and if they would take time to unpack it, they'd realize they're arguing about two different things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, gosh, we were in such conflict for, I don't know, it was probably like 4 days, but it felt like 5 weeks as far as,
Like, forever.
because I wasn't talking to you, because I talked to Lily, like, I don't know, 5 times a week all the time. And it felt like it was forever. But once we sat down and we actually communicated what the stories were, and we allowed ourselves to be adult about it, because really, like, it's an adult skill. I think we don't learn how to communicate as children most of the time.
No.
And so when we were able to sit down and be adults, it was like we were back to drinking tea and eating cookies, in an hour.
Because we're old ladies
cry.
and that's what we do for fun.
That's what we do for fun.
Yeah. Well, and you hit on something there. We aren't taught how to communicate. Like, your blueprint for communication came from the people who raised you and how you saw adults interact as a child. And a lot of us got really bad examples. And even like my partner, he grew up in what I would consider a very loving home with, 2 parents and a healthy relationship. But even for him, he never saw his parents resolve conflict. He would see them kind of get mad at each other. And he's like, I kind of knew that, like, when we went to bed, they went out to the garage and kind of sorted it out. He's like, but even for him, he was like, I never saw how to resolve conflict. And that's something as an adult, he went to, talk to someone about to get more skills and information on, because he struggled with resolving conflict because he never saw that part. Sometimes we only see the fight.
Yeah. Oh, so that's so big. So big, because I think truly at some point in your life, because Sean's the same way, he grew up in a very loving household. But at some point, every single human on the planet has to start to look at, what did I absorb as a child as far as communication is concerned? And if you haven't done that, this is your invitation to, like, go do the work, go contact Lilly, go do the work, figure out how to communicate, because it's going to change everything. It's going to change not just your relationship, but how you show up at work and with friends and with yourself, because communication is literally the key to all of it. All of it. So, okay, I feel like we've talked about tangible communication and what it looks like to verbally express yourself and use words to verbally express yourself. I want to know, what role does nonverbal communication, because what does that play in dating and relationships, and how can someone become attuned to cues, because I'll just tell you a personal story, and you know this story I've told it to you a million times. I came from, my dynamic was that there was a lot of nonverbal communication in my household, and that you had to guess a lot what people were feeling, right? Dad would get triggered and upset and would, run to his bedroom and shut the door and shut down emotionally, right? So there were always these I became really attuned to nonverbal, and not the best healthy way, nonverbal communication, because verbal communication wasn't used a lot. So can we talk about the importance of nonverbal communication and how someone, like, what's the difference? What's the difference between verbal and nonverbal, and how can someone become attuned to understanding that in partnership?
Yeah. So when we talk about nonverbal, that's when you're looking kind of for cues, whether it's in yourself or the other person. And like, we've all been there. You're talking to someone and they fold their arms and they feel closed off to you. You're like, oh, you're putting up a wall. Or you'll notice that people, when they want to be in a power pose, they'll put their hands on their hips because they're signaling that, like, I'm in charge. And so your body speaks a lot. And like you said, when you were younger, that's kind of how you read the room was, okay, well, he's kind of doing this person's closed off, or whether it's a facial expression or someone is turning away from you. I think a big part of nonverbal communication is people will pick up their cell phones when someone's talking to them, and they'll do this and be like, yeah, I'm listening to you. And it's like, no, you're not. You're literally signaling to me that I'm not important. Something else is more important. So first off, I think it's just important to be aware of yourself when it comes to nonverbal communication, because that's what you have control over. And so a couple of things you can do if you're in conflict. Something I like to do is I take my hands and I just turn my palms up and I place them on my thighs. So if I'm talking to someone, I'm signaling to my own body that I am open and receptive. I'm not making fists and closing myself off and kind of clenching down. I'm just like keeping myself in a state of I'm going to hear them, and I'm signaling to myself. And then I can signal to them by making eye contact, by nodding my head as they're talking, letting them know I'm following them and I'm with them, and paying attention to them, turning my body towards them. That's a huge one for me. If I'm having like a deep conversation with someone, I'm like, I don't want you to sit on the couch beside me and face, like, I want you to turn towards me. Like, so I know I have your full attention. So I would say when it starts with nonverbal communication, it's really noticing, like, how are you showing up? Because you don't really have control over how your partner shows up.
Yeah. So big. And becoming attuned. I think this is where really the somatic piece comes into, is understanding how safety feels in your own body and learning what that looks like for yourself, so that when you're in conflict with someone or just in regular communication, you can understand what that safety feels like inside, so that you can also recognize that in someone else if and when it's not happening.
Absolutely. Especially when you're going into dating someone, that's a really good read on whether or not, because your body is going to speak to you.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we fall in love with the potential and we start to fantasize and be like, oh, maybe this person is it. But if we really tuned in and realized that maybe those butterflies that I'm feeling is actually my nervous system saying, hey, red flag, like, this doesn't feel good to us. I don't feel at peace. I don't feel grounded around that person. And recognizing the signs, and you can speak really well to this, but when someone else is emotionally flooded, like during conflict, if you notice that your partner is overwhelmed, maybe their eyes are darting around, they're starting to kind of, move in their seat, they physically have this like resemblance that they want to run away from you. That's not a time to like hammer down on your facts. It's a time to stop and check in and say, hey, are you okay? Can we take a second?
Yeah. That we struggle with that in my partnership. We definitely struggle with, and this is, again, we'll talk about this in the Dating at 8 support group. That is oftentimes difficult for an 8, is to notice those cues of emotional flooding. I notice it in myself, and Sean has gotten better at being like, okay, the conversation's over. Like, we're not going to keep going down the fact track, is what I like to call it. And so it's important to understand the nonverbal communication cues too, not just for yourself, but for like you said, the other person, because it's imperative when you're dating someone and when you're in relationship. So we've talked about And I love that this is naturally progressing into dating. We've talked a lot about being in partnership and communication. Let's touch really quickly. And here's the deal. Whether we're talking about being in relationship or dating, all of everything that Lilly has spoken about applies to both, because you need it even when you're dating someone in the beginning stages. But there is this little nuanced time when you first meet someone that I believe communication is vital. And so I want to know, if someone is dating or if they're thinking about getting back out in the dating world, what communication advice would you give them if they are out there in what I like to call the wild jungle of dating?
Yeah, I mean, back to that word at the beginning is being curious and asking questions and then leaning on the listening, because people will tell you who they are if you listen to them. And I know in my experience, I have just looked past all the red flags, thought it was a circus instead, and it looked fun because, again, I was in my head about the fantasy and the potential of what could be. But if I had just asked more questions and listened and noticed, again, how it lands in your body, like, do I feel good around this person? Do I feel safe around this person? Am I comfortable around this person? And really giving them space to tell you who they are, I think is like the first thing I would tell people when you're like getting back out there and dating. And I think it's also really important when you know what your values are. So I'm big on like your core values. And for me, that's like my top 3 core values are honesty, kindness, and growth. And so if I go through life with that kind of lens on, is this, am I being honest? Am I being kind? And am I pursuing growth? I can kind of suss out a little quicker when I'm around someone that's just not aligning with that. So I think it's important when you go into dating to know, like, what am I looking for? Because if you don't know what you're looking for, you'll find anything. You'll catch anything. But are you really listening and letting that person tell you who they are? Or are you just fantasizing about who he could be or she could be?
Yeah, which is gosh, if I had $1 for every time I saw that, and also that I experienced it, my gosh, like and you know this because you were in it. When I was in the jungle, you were the person I called all the time. How many red flags did I bypass? It was ridiculous. And if I just would have, first, if I would have listened to the language of my nervous system, if I would have learned how to communicate with my body and truly know what felt safe and what didn't, it would have saved me years of heartache, probably. And then if I would have actually felt comfortable enough with communicating in partnership with someone, like I remember calling you after Sean and I first started dating. I was on our first date when he came from Denver to Nashville. And I remember I posted about this a few days ago, sitting on the counter. And there was a shift in this relationship because I said, you know what? I'm going to communicate. I am not going to go into my old survival pattern, which is just to people please all over the place and just accept something that the other person likes because I feel like I need to do that to be accepted. But I remember when Sean came and visited me in that first date, that I sat on the counter and I just told him everything. I communicated. I told him about my past. I told him about the really awful parts of my past that I had hid in previous relationships until we were 2, 3, 4 months in. And then I unloaded all of it. I learned to actually communicate. And I swear to you, it was in that moment, from being able to communicate with him from a space of authenticity and transparency, that really set the foundation for our entire relationship. So everything that Lilly has been talking about, whether you're in partnership or you're dating, communication is key. And if you don't know how to communicate properly, or you haven't looked at your communication and how it was built inside of your system, you're going to struggle at some point. Relationships are going to feel hard. Dating is going to feel hard. Your health is going to feel hard. All of it is going to feel hard.
Absolutely. Because you're advocating for yourself. And in that moment with Sean, it's like you also let him know like what you're looking for and what you want. And I think so many people shy away from that because we're worried about scaring someone away.
Mm.
And there's a difference, right, between going on a first date and being like, I want to get married tomorrow and have babies, right?
Please
Like,
don't do that.
that
Do
might
not do
scare
that.
someone away. But letting someone know, like, this is what I'm looking for in life. Like, I remember when I first met my boyfriend, I told him, I was like, I kind of want an unconventional life. Like, I'm looking to, like, this is how I want to live. This is where I want to go. And I wasn't telling him to like be like, do you want to do this with me? I was telling him so he knew, like, this is the picture that I'm looking for. It's a little different than what some people may be looking for. And I want to put that out there instead of trying to fit yourself in this box of, well, I don't, like you said, people pleasing, like, I don't want to upset them. So I'll tell them in 5 dates that I want a relationship, or I'll tell them in 3 dates that I'm looking to have kids. Or it's like, be upfront and, I mean, scare away the people that you're going to scare away.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember I dated this guy. He loved hamburgers. Side note. And like, I'll eat a hamburger. I like some good protein, but I don't really love hamburgers. I like turkey burgers. I don't really like hamburgers. We went on 5 dates, and on all 5 dates, I had a hamburger. And I think back to that moment and I'm like, gosh, I've like, first off, I just give myself a big fat pat on the back because I've grown so much to be able to be like, no, I don't want a hamburger today. But there's so, I know that sounds like this is a crazy story, but there are so many. And if you're listening, maybe this is you, there are so many of us out there who are terrified to communicate because they're just like Lilly spoke to earlier. There are all of these different meanings behind what happens if I communicate. And so if that's you, if you're the friend that, and listen, I'm guilty. This is why I surround myself with friends who can just make this decision. But if you have a friend who comes to you and says, hey, what do you want to eat for dinner tonight? And you're the person that's like, I don't care.
I don't care.
I don't care.
Anything.
Yeah, anything. You might want to look at that, right? Because that's you not really being truthful. Sometimes you really don't care. Like sometimes I really don't care, but sometimes I do care. And it's taken a lot of work to get to the point where I'm able to communicate that I care and I have a voice and I have an opinion. And so this has just been such a beautiful conversation because we need to learn to communicate. It is such a vital skill. And like you said, many of us are not taught how to do it. So thank you for providing all of this incredible information. And there's one more question I have for you that I ask on every podcast. I want to know, what does being in an aligned relationship, what does that mean to you when you hear it?
Being in an aligned relationship. It's funny. I looked over all your questions except for the last one. This is off the cuff. For me, it's being in a relationship where I can be completely myself and not, again, try to fit myself into this ideal person that I think someone would want and I think someone would love. Because I struggled with that for a long time of trying to earn love and trying to be perfect and be, everything that the man could want me to be. And being in an aligned relationship is where it's like, oh, I'm enough. And, I still have my quirks and my pitfalls and the things that I'm working on, but being with someone who is going to see me for who I am. And I'm not ashamed to be that person. Like, this, I'm a little goofy. I'm a nerd. I'm a little weird. Like, and being able to be that and not trying to, I always say, like, put myself in a box. Like I've done that in the past. And that's something that I'm like, I refuse to do anymore in life. And so that, being completely myself.
I love it. I mean, truly, that's the bread and butter when it comes to being in partnership, is somebody that you can be yourself with and not feel like you have to hide. So thank you. I love that explanation. I always get such different answers. That's why I asked that question. I love it. It's like one of my favorite questions to ask. So before we wrap up for today, I want you to tell everybody all the things about you. Where can they find you? Where are you doing your best work? What's coming up for you? Just give yourself a moment to shamelessly plug.
Shamelessly plug. Well, the best place would be just go to my website. It's lillyrachels.com. I am at Lilly Rachels, 2 L's, on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and lately I've really been leaning into LinkedIn. So if you're on LinkedIn, find me there, connect with me, send me a message. And if you're interested in communication or you have questions, I love to talk to people, love to communicate. So send me a message and I will respond to you. So, but yeah, lillyrachels.com would be the best place. And then I also have a podcast. They're short episodes. They come out every Monday. It's called Growth Over Easy. So go ahead and check that out.
Yay, Lilly. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful because you guys get a little glimpse into one of my people. Like Lilly is my person. I go to her. And it's just so, I mean, how beautiful that a therapist is one of my best friends. And so you guys get a little glimpse into what it's like to be in our heads, because truly this conversation is what it's like 4 times a week when I call her and we talk about, okay, what do I do? How do I communicate with Sean better? And so hopefully everyone that's listening today was able to take, and I know that they will take, some vital nuggets from what you had to say. I just love you. And I'm so glad that you were here.
Oh, thank you so much. I love you. And I love how we process and feel things. And again, it's looking back on the journey, how things have changed and how we have grown. And yes, thank you for having me.
That wraps up today's episode of the Aligned Love podcast. One thing that would really help me and the other new potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment wherever you tune in and listen. Also, make sure to link up with me on Instagram at Lauren Zoller, and please share this podcast with anyone who you think may enjoy it. Until next episode, remember, every transformation begins with one moment of awareness, and I hope today has been yours. I'll see you next time.